40 consortia fighting for the spoils. To no one's surprise but their own, TVAM lost the licence for national breakfast programming to something called Sunrise TV. The other losers were concentrated in the south of England. TSW went down to West Country TV, TVS lost out to Meridian, and ITV's biggest company, Thames, was defeated by Carlton Television. No one survives long in the television jungle without acquiring a thick skin. Among the losers, some were lining up to announce they were taking legal action or advice, others warning their successful overbidders would soon be bust.
What can you tell us about the bid, the £14 million bid?
The £14 million bid was a proper and sensible bid given the exigencies of the business. I do not believe that Sunrise will be a profitable company. I predict that Sunrise will be bankrupt in 1994.
Today's carve-up is a direct consequence of Mrs. Thatcher, who regarded the ITV companies as the last bastion of restrictive practices.
Action.
The idea was to use the market to slash costs, cut down on overmanning, and in the process give the Treasury a new cash cow. Certainly, in the run-up to the auction, costs were cut and staff levels cut too. The ITV companies have shed 40% of their workforce since the mid-80s. In May this year, the industry's leading players turned up at the Independent Television Commission, appointed as auctioneer, to hand in their bids. The companies had won some concessions, and quality criteria had been introduced which softened the original free market proposal. But it was a very unusual sort of auction. Each candidate had to hand in a sealed envelope containing their cash bid. Then came the quality hurdle. Before the ITC looked at the money, detailed business plans were scrutinised. Companies were excluded if their programmes looked poor or if their finances weren't up to scratch. In theory, those that survived were competing on the size of their bids. The ITC subjected them to one final test for what it called exceptional circumstances, but it seems to have found none. The highest bidders left in the game won the franchises. By excluding so many high bids at the quality hurdle, the ITC has moved the auction a long way from a pure market affair. They've also greatly reduced the amount of money the Treasury will be getting out of the auction.
Had the ITC been required to award each licence to the highest bidder, irrespective of whether he passed the quality threshold, the total tender yield per annum would have been almost £100 million higher than it will be under the awards we've made.
As a result of all this, the auction has thrown up some strange anomalies. Central managed to win the second most valuable franchise with a bid of only £2,000, whereas TVS lost their less valuable franchise despite a huge, nearly £60 million bid. One of the biggest rows has blown up in the Granada region. They've successfully retained their franchise with a bid of £9 million. But that's upset their rivals, Northwest TV, led by Brookside's creator Phil Redmond. With a strong programme-making record, the backing of two other successful regional TV companies, and a bid well above Granada's, they're outraged. Well, earlier I asked the chairman of Granada, David Plowright, whether it wasn't rather an odd system which rewards a bidder who hasn't paid the market rate.
I can't say that this system is the better way that Lord Thompson sought, and I don't think you would find many who would take that view. But it developed into a hybrid, if you remember, from the rather free market approach, and I think many of us are very grateful that the quality considerations were introduced into the bill. I shudder to think what have happened if they were not.
But isn't it the case that the real reason you could afford to bid only £9 million as against £35 million from your competitors was that you knew in the end the ITC would look after you because you were part of the old television establishment?
No, I wouldn't take that view. I think that we took seriously the invitation to apply. We did our best to forecast the revenue of 10 years, and we knew the cost of programmes and the quality of the service that I think they were seeking. And remember, it is a regional contract, and I think companies that make a commitment to the region which expresses itself on the screen, but also has something to do with your contribution to the cultural and social life in the area, plays some part.
But Phil Redmond's company was offering about 4 times as much regional programming as you.
Yes, I've never taken the view that volume is necessarily better than quality. And we have applied to our regional programs the same production values that we apply to our network programs.
But the whole principle behind this shake-up initially was that it was going to bring in, first of all, be determined by the market, that's gone by the board, and secondly, that it was going to bring in new blood. That hasn't happened in your case at all, has it?
There's only about me left from the last contract round. There's a great deal of new blood in Granada, a lot of energetic young program makers who have demonstrated their ability over the last 5 years to make programs that appeal to the public, appeal to the advertiser, and indeed also to make programs that meet those requirements of a service looking for quality, range and diversity, which I've said before are the new words for information, education and entertainment.
Well, joining us now is Phil Redmond of the unsuccessful bidders for that franchise that Granada retained. The ITC obviously thought your ideas were pretty second-rate.
Well, I think that's one of the things that we've left us a bit bewildered today, because if Yorkshire Television's judgment was good enough to pass the quality in their own region, and if Tyne T's judgment was good enough to pass the quality in their region, it seems odd that the combination of Yorkshire Television, Tyne T's television, myself and Mersey Television didn't actually meet the so-called quality test in the Northwest, and we're still trying to find a reason as to how any rational body could have come to that decision.
Are you really dissatisfied with the principle that there was a quality hurdle, or the way in which the quality hurdle was implemented?
Excuse me. I think the big problem is we don't quite understand what's happened with the ITC's interpretation of the whole system. When I came on this programme shortly after the bill was published, and was a great supporter of the principles of the bill. And you've touched on them yourself, and that was to bring new blood, new ideas, but also another important principle, and that was to get out the excess cash out of the bloated ITV system. And I think it's worth sort of just taking ourselves back to the previous item in the programme. It's quite sobering to sit here and to be talking about what is, after all, only television. Actually, nobody is going to die from these decisions today. But it seems a bit sort of odd to watch the ITC seeming to relish the fact that they've deprived the Treasury of something like £200 million. And that £200 million could have actually been better spent in health and education. And if we wanted to keep it into television, it could have actually given Channel 4 a much more secure funding base for the future. These are the kind of strange decisions that have come out today that we're still wrestling with.
But between that original proposition and today's announced decision, the goalposts moved, didn't they?
Well, other people throughout the day have said the goalposts have moved, and I think towards the end of the day, it might be that I'm getting tired now, but I think I'm beginning to come round to that view myself, really.
Phil Redmond, thank you. Well, it's because British opinion makers like to think that British television is more than visual chewing gum that any shake-up was bound to be regarded with suspicion. Until now, the establishment had done its best to restrain the rampant commercialism summed up in Lord Thompson, the other Lord Thompson's, famous observation about Scottish television, that it was a licence to print money. Now there's arguably a much tougher market operating. Could that mean poorer programmes? David Levy reports.
The controllers are ready on vision and sound. The vision and sound are on. The station goes on the air.
Hello, Radio Olympia. This is direct television from the studios at Alexander Palace.
40 years ago, it was difficult to imagine just how powerful television would become as it moved into our homes. Now, few doubt its potency, both political and cultural. The sceptics fear that won't last much longer.
What television has done, triumphantly, it won't after this act gets in effect, it has said to people, the world is wider than you think. To which they say, well, thanks very much, I didn't know what I'd like till I saw what I could have. So it's been a great widener, whether in news or comedy or plays or current affairs or anything you like that. And this is one of its great virtues.
The words of Richard Hoggart, who for the past 40 years has monitored the culture of the nation, its literature and its television. Many in the TV industry share his view that the current Broadcasting Act would damage British television. As competition and commercial pressures forced ITV down market, the BBC would follow. TV's unique influence as opinion former and cultural agenda setter would end. But will it? Despite those fears, there are considerable pressures within the system itself that will ensure that ITV survives and that television will retain its influence.
So let's meet our next contestant and your opponent.
In the 1950s, ITV was attacked for its diet of cheap variety shows and quiz games. They pulled in the audiences and advertisers, but antagonised the regulators. The reaction to ITV's early excesses was the creation in 1960 of the Pilkington Committee. It looked in detail at the question of quality and called the TV moguls in to justify themselves. Those like Richard Hoggart, himself a member of the committee, who worry about the future of broadcasting today, fear the arguments used by the proprietors then will be wheeled out once again.
They said, we believe in giving the public what the public want, not what we or anybody else thinks is good for them. And we got so tired of hearing that pompous phrasing. And we got T.S. Eliot in, and we said to him, a lot of these commercial people are saying that they give the public what the public want, not what we or they think is good for the public. And Eliot said, those who claim to give the public what the public want begin by underestimating public taste. That's the key phrase, underestimating public taste. They end by debauching it. And I'd say they end by trivialising it.
To the guardians of Britain's culture, the game shows represent the depths of commercial TV, as pervasive as they are popular, as they're cheap to make.
Right, what programme is this, Kate? This is 33.
William G. Stewart is a master of the art. With the launch of The Price is Right, he had an audience of 16 million within a month. Today, he makes 15 to 1 for Channel 4, churning out shows at a rate of 11 a week, 2 every day, 3 on a Wednesday. Average cost less than £20,000. But even he wouldn't like his kind of television to take over our screens. We're going to see more of this kind of television?
I fear you are. I can't put my finger on a figure of, say, 10 years ago. I can tell you now that there are something like 25 or 30 hours of quiz and game shows across the networks today, this week. I wouldn't be at all surprised if you saw a lot more.
That's the logic of experience.
Once accidents like this were sad.
Traditionally, advertisers wanted mass audiences for mass products. The game shows, sitcoms and soaps of the early years of ITV met their needs.
Caroline's changed all that. To this. Caroline's changed all that.
But now, the ad men want targeted audiences.
Delaney Fletcher's Slowmaker Delaney.
Their complaint against ITV is that it's already too down market. There aren't enough quality programmes to attract high-spending A and B viewers. The past enemies of difficult and highbrow programming are now its most powerful allies.
If ITV is going to continue to win over the advertisers who spend the most money on advertising, they will have to continue, even in the long term, to produce high-quality programmes which attract those kind of audiences.
Today, 4 new companies have joined the world of ITV, but all know that before long there'll be much more competition. Cable and satellite will give most British homes a choice of anything up to 100 channels, but they'll excel in the niche market. Advertisers reckon ITV, Channel 4 and the BBC will fight off the cheap broadcasters by being different and offering a mix of programmes.
If you have just quiz shows or just soaps or just sports, you'll get just one sort of audience and you'll get a quick shot for a year or two and it'll build up for a year or two, but you'll miss all sorts of other experiences, you'll miss all sorts of other audiences. They won't come in. If you're going to reach through that same box, the generality of British public in a way that penetrates and has clout, you've got to keep hitting them where it matters to them. The documentaries have got to matter to people who really like documentaries. They've got to be good political programmes that really matter to people who like politics. Same with arts programmes, same with all sorts of so-called minority programmes. We're talking about programmes that get between 2 and 5 million viewers, programmes, figures that Rupert Murdoch would give his eye teeth for.
London Weekend and Melvyn Bragg have survived today's franchise awards, but the day will be remembered less for its winners and losers than as the moment when regulation gave way to the rules of the market.
Hello, in this programme we look at the life and musical career of Heinrich Schiff, whose performances...
Next Sunday's South Bank show, on the cellist Heinrich Schiff, though hardly a subject which will attract the uninitiated, is now aimed at the advertisers rather than the regulators. The acid test for ITV over the next few years is whether this more sophisticated commercialism can replace the old role of regulation and ensure that British TV retains its audiences, its quality and its influence.
Go back, you've missed out, it is.
The purists have their doubts.
Come back in a year, 2 years, and see how many of them have still got education officers, arts officers, are doing serious current affairs programmes, how far the timing of programmes has changed and the nature has changed. And I'll buy you whatever you like, as long as it's reasonable, if you can prove to me that it hasn't gone downhill.
Well, with us now is Michael Grade. Michael, the broadcasting organisations have been all over themselves all day about the scale of this change. Is it actually that big a change?
It isn't, surprisingly. I thought it was going to be... I shared the sort of pessimism that came through in that film until I heard what the ITC announced today. The key factor is the amount of money that people feared was going to come out of the system. In fact, George Russell demonstrated today, and David Glenn Cross of the ITC, that in fact their calculation is that the Treasury will get something a little over £40 million a year more out of a total revenue of £1.6 billion. The key to quality programming is having the money to do it. And by some miracle, the ITC have conjured out of this dreadful bill a way of constructing an ITV system where the money isn't going to pour into the Treasury.
Although clearly some will have more than others. Central Television will clearly have a lot more money to spend on programmes than someone who's...
You must be very careful about making comparisons on the cash bid between different regions, because there are two pieces to the bid which weren't mentioned in that film. There is the qualifying revenue, which the ITC call the rent, which in Central's case is very substantial indeed, which is much more of a leveller. Yes, there is a big difference, but the commitment that Central will have made in their application to investment in programme will be enormous.
Now that rather gloomy prognosis that Richard Hoggart drew...
Well, it's a dream world of the past. Richard Hoggart is talking about a day when there were two monopolies, the BBC with a monopoly of revenue, and one channel ITV with a monopoly of advertising revenue. Of course, the Pilkington Committee was right. Of course, in that day, he was absolutely right. The use of the monopoly revenue not to provide a public service was inexcusable in those days.
Now,
the world has changed completely.
Sure, there'll be a multiplicity of channels in 10, 20 years' time,
Certainly.
and that is bound to affect how people perceive television. It is presumably also bound to affect the sort of things that any one channel can produce.
It depends on how much money is available to invest in programmes. And the key to the ITC's decisions today, and the quality hurdle not applying just to the programming ideas, but to the quality of the money, the investment in the business plans, in programming, is that the money will remain in British programming, produced by British producers, independent and otherwise. And that is, I think, I was amazed to wake up this morning and see how much money was going to remain in the system, because that was the fear.
But doesn't the future belong to the really big moguls, the Berlusconis and the Murdochs and the rest of them?
I don't think so, because I think each television market is of its own kind. British values work well in British programmes, and only British programme makers know how to do that. That is why the BBC still commands nearly 50% of the audience. That's why Rupert Murdoch is having such trouble gaining a substantial audience for his services. He doesn't understand the British market in broadcasting. Yes, there is a market for all films, all sport, the kind of premium things that Rupert Murdoch can offer, and I would very happily subscribe to that. But he has failed singly to understand what the British viewer wants. The Murdochs and Berlusconis of this world will never understand in a million years why Brookside and Coronation Street work for the British public.